in 314 for a shooting at Century Theaters. They're saying somebody's shooting in the auditorium.
Roger, keep your fires west of the smoke. You're cleared hot. An officer hit. Send me the world.
Don't go over that fence. Don't go over that fence. Grab the shotgun again.
Welcome to Tactical Tangents.
Welcome back to Tactical Tangents. This is Mike and Jim. On a number of occasions in my role as a professional instructor and a law enforcement trainer, I've gone to my bosses or my colleagues, and I've taken ideas to them that were promptly shot down because of a simple lack of trust and faith. At least that's how I interpret it, as a lack of trust and faith in the members of the organization. And they tell me in more or less their own words that if I tell a police recruit X, Y, and Z, they're going to hear something totally different. Or that SWAT guys might be capable of X, Y, or Z, but only the high performers are capable of making those sorts of decisions and thinking on their own, and that we have to teach to the, quote, lowest common denominator. And I think that's a bunch of horse shit. If your people are incapable of performing or thinking critically or doing those things, that speaks only to your own failure as an instructor or a leader or a mentor or whatever. And I just reject that state of mind. So when we started Tactical Tangents, we did that because we wanted to help correct that trend. And we understand that trying to do something about that problem, about this lowest common denominator thing, is a difficult task. It takes money and time and resources. But the whole point is to raise the common denominator, so to speak, by teaching many of the things that we just don't otherwise have time to teach in the academy or in-service training and things like that. Being tactical, if we're using tactical as our hook, is all about problem solving. It's about playing odds and distilling lessons learned. And a lot of those lessons are written in blood and distilling them down into the best practices for your industry or organization. So we're going to talk about how to be and think like a tactician in tonight's episode. This episode is brought to you by Ride On Optics. If you haven't put a red dot on your pistol yet and you're looking to get on board with the wave of the future, make sure you go look at Ride On Optics. Their pistol red dot and all of their optics have a lifetime guarantee. They also have a great military and first responder discount. You probably won't be able to find a better discount if you fit one of those categories. You can find them at rideonoptics.com.
This episode is also brought to you by Dry Fire Mag. Dry Fire Mag solves the common and annoying problem in dry fire training of constantly having to rack the slide to reset the trigger. With a Dry Fire Mag, all you do is clear your weapon, load this training magazine, and work on your trigger work. Check them out on dryfiremag.com. So, as far as thinking like a tactician goes, and where I'm heading with this is that we have been building to this concept for a long time, trying to put together all these different ideas, OODA loops and that sort of thing. And also, I've modeled a lot of how we're teaching off of how the military does it, how the Air Force specifically does it, right? The Air Force has put a lot of time, money, and effort into a program called the Air Force Weapons School, which is a graduate program that creates a cadre of weapons and tactics instructors across the weapons systems of the Air Force. You might know it as Top Gun. Top Gun's the Navy term for the Weapons Tactics Instructor Course, WTI. In the Air Force side, it's just called the Weapons School or the Weapons Instructor Course, the WIC. And it would be silly not to steal ideas from it and try to figure out how we can apply those ideas out to law enforcement and civilian concealed carry. The difference is resources. Your agency may not have $1 billion to sink into a giant red flag training center in Nevada. It may not have $1 billion or all the manpower you need to have this like cadre of guys that teaches the wider cadre of guys, right? And in civilian concealed carry, it's kind of on you. And it's on you to figure out where you're going to get training, how much you're willing to invest in that training. And if you are a trainer yourself on the civilian side, what are you investing in making yourself a better trainer? So I want you to think about train the trainer and what that really means. And how do you make yourself a tactician, someone who can develop and teach tactics? And how do you build a little cadre of little yous that can go out and build and teach tactics? So that's where we're heading. We need to define it. And again, when I talk about it in an Air Force context, I'm talking about like the tactics office in an Air Force flying squadron. And the tactics office is there to acquire and vet or like evaluate, capture, and train best practices in both the offensive and defensive employment of the weapons system. It's usually, but not always, headed by a graduate of the big weapons school, the Air Force's Top Gun. Again, in this context, I want to apply it more broadly, though. I want to figure out how to apply it to the rest of the military, how to apply it to law enforcement, how to apply it to civilian personal protection. And that's tricky. So I'm going to bounce around on you a little bit, and that's okay. And we have to define tactical, right? We are tactical tangents. But think about what that means. Mike talked about problem solving as part of what tactical is. That's true. It's also a scale. Anytime we're talking about tactical in the military, we're talking about small scale, when individuals fight individuals. The next level up is operational. Next level above that is strategic. Tactics is also how you figure out the best ways to accomplish a goal with the resources you have. And that's different from, but it's a little bit connected to, rules and standards. Unlike the rules, the big black letter procedures, your tactics should be fairly fluid. You should have a little bit of discretion about choosing one tactic over the other, or how you apply that tactic to a given situation, right? Now, I understand in the law enforcement context, usually when I hear the term tactics instructor, it means like the defensive tactics instructor, right? The guy who teaches you how to like wrestle with, a combative suspect, or a firearms instructor. Something like that.
Yeah, so defensive tactics, it's got like tactics in the name, and I don't know who we can credit for coming up with you could just as easily call that, like around here we call it arrest and control tactics. It's the same thing as defensive tactics. We still call it DT for short, but they're just talking about that component of crime fighting, right? We still do tactics as firearms instructors too, but one of the challenges that we run into is you've got your DT guys teaching DT things, and you have your firearms guys teaching firearms things. And generally speaking, that's fine because they're different disciplines. My building search tactics are different than my weapons retention tactics. But in the context of weapons retention, as an example, there's crossover. And so that's where we want everyone to kind of be on the same page. And to muddy the waters even further, then you have your driving instructors who, interestingly, are the ones that end up teaching things like traffic stops and high-risk stops, and there's tactics involved there as well. Tactics that also, by the way, involve pointing guns at people. So we have this like silo effect that we're often dealing with in law enforcement, where everyone is in their own little silo of instructors, and we have a crossover problem in that there isn't enough.
And that's exactly what I want to talk about in this episode is, first off, where do all of those different tactics come from? Who vetted them? Who's tested them? And is there a cadre that taught those guys?
Yeah.
Right? Who made your firearms instructor? Is it the same guy who made your driving tactics instructor? And is that centralized? Is it like, the state post, the police officer standards and training, or is it somebody else? Is it the SWAT guys that come up with all the ideas and vet them? How does that work in your agency?
Again, and my agency is just one example, but for the most part, to become a qualified instructor, it's controlled by the state post board, like you said. You have to be an Arizona post firearms instructor, Arizona post driving or DT instructor or whatever. But your agency has some say in who they're going to send to those schools. And just because you're a quote-unquote firearms instructor, you're just a member of the group that are firearms instructors, doesn't mean that you're like the main guy out at the range doing it all the time. So you're going to see some variance there in the level of expertise in those people. But again, we run into this problem where the guy that's got a knack for firearms, like, might not have a knack at all for the other areas.
Yep.
And so that's what we need is good critical thinkers that can apply cross-domain stuff and find the synergy among those silos, right? Break down the silos, flatten the silos, as they say, right? Like that's like the big push in law enforcement in the industry, the training industry, is to flatten the silos and blend everything together. But
and
that's
also,
a challenge.
And also professionalize those silos and make sure that the guy teaching you really knows what he's doing and understands how it fits into the broader context of all the other tactics, right? And where this gets even harder is on the personal defense concealed carry side. How do you know when you sign up for a concealed carry class that instructor is worth anything? I've heard some I've heard some really stupid things in concealed carry classes. How do you know what you're buying? And if you're an instructor, again, how do you develop yourself as an instructor and professionalize yourself? So we're going to talk about that, and it takes inspired learning. We have to make you eager to become that next level professional tactician, and we have to teach other people how to do it.
I have one little thing on that, Jim, and that's that if you're, especially in the context of like concealed carry, where you're, at least in the beginning, you're literally going to be flying blind. At least if you join a police academy, we're going to force feed you some curriculum. Like, you're not going to have a lot of say in that. And this advice applies also if you're a new or rookie police officer when you get out on your own and out of the academy or whatever. But especially for like a self-defense CCW crowd is, go get your initial training, but then don't stop there. Like, go out of your way to get other perspectives and learn from other people. And for the people that work in public safety, it's the same thing. Go out of your way to talk to people from other agencies in other areas and see how they're doing business. I remember one of the things that was sort of an inspiration for the kinds of conversations that we needed to have here on Tactical Tangents was when I heard an interview of a guy from Baltimore PD who's become like a police civil rights activist. He was a former sergeant there or whatever, and he was talking about all the corrupt, terrible stuff that was going on in Baltimore PD. And I don't know how much of it was true or whatever, it's not the point, but I remember thinking to myself, like, in a million years, we would never get away with that stuff around here. Like, not in the culture of my agency, at least, and I'm proud to say that for the most part, we're pretty squared away in that regard. Now, that doesn't mean that there's the occasional thing that might slip through the cracks or something. We've had our missteps, sure, but the point is you don't know what it's like in those areas until you start reaching out. So that inspired learning thing that Jim is talking about is the foundation of becoming a good tactician. You have to go out and seek it out and be a good student. We did an episode on that. I don't remember what number it is, but go find it. How to be a good student.
Yep. So if you've listened to this podcast for a while, you've probably caught on to some recurring themes. We're headed somewhere with this project, and we're trying to build you up as a listener, as a tactician. And the essence of being a tactician is being able to take all the grand strategy, all the philosophy, all the doctrine, all the foreign intelligence, and all the rules that govern how you do business, and the equipment you've got available to you, and the budget you've got, and the people you have to work with and train with, and convert all of that into practical day-to-day plans and procedures and solutions to the problems you're going to run into to accomplish your goal, whatever that goal is.
Yeah, just as an example of taking all of those things and trying to find something useful out of them, most cops that I talk to on a day-to-day basis have never even heard of Waco or Ruby Ridge or the Miami shootout or the Hollywood shootout. And if they have heard of it, they probably can't tell you a whole lot about it in the way of tactics. They know that there was a shootout. They know that there was a thing that happened in Miami back in the day. They might have heard the term Waco or Ruby Ridge, but that's about it, right? They can't tell you what lessons law enforcement learned from those things or what example they set. But if they did know any better, they would understand that they shaped a lot about the way that law enforcement, especially tactical teams, in the case of Waco and Ruby Ridge, contain and call out people out of a house and deal with barricaded suspects with hostages. And that might have been a new thing for a lot of people in those teams back then, but they were prominent enough to bring attention to them. And that's not only for examples like that happened 30 plus years ago, back in the 80s and 90s, that's even things 10 years ago. Even things 10 years ago, think about how long it's been since Ferguson now.
Yeah.
6 years or something like that. I mean, it hasn't been that long, but you already saw a big shift. So the whole point of this project is to bring some awareness to it so that the next time you hear about it, it's not just, there was something that happened back in the day, right? It's to try to distill out some of those lessons so that you can apply them to your job every day, your performance every day.
Yeah, and you get a choice whether you want to be the lowest common denominator or not, right? And that goes back to the inspired learning and making a conscious decision. No, I want to be the next level. I
Take
want to
personal responsibility for your success and your professionalism.
And not just that, but then how do you take the next step past that from good and proficient and solid to part of the cadre, right? One of the guys that makes everybody else good and proficient and solid, makes your whole agency or your whole family good and good and proficient and solid, right? So when we talk about raising the lowest common denominator, this is it. It starts with you. So the foundation is tactical and technical proficiency. It's being good at your job, right? One of my favorite sayings about special operations is it's not about doing the weird stuff. It's about getting the fundamentals right even when stuff gets weird. So you have to be so good at the fundamentals that you can work on the other stuff. You can think about how to teach it well, but still be able to demonstrate it well, right? Without dropping your basic game. And you have to also know the background and the history and the philosophy and the doctrine. So it's great that you've read Sun Tzu. And Sun Tzu might have said something like, know the terrain and victory will be assured for 1,000 years. And that's great. It doesn't mean anything unless you understand the context, right? As a tactician, I want you to know how to figure out the terrain and how to exploit it. And then be able to teach that to the youngest, dumbest dude around you. And that can take a lot of forms. That could be like, hey, recognize that parking lots are dangerous places because they're transition spaces. Or it could be something more technical, like how I would expect an infantry guy to understand it with like OCOCA, observation, cover and concealment, obstacles, key terrain, avenues of approach or escape. So I need you to be able to take that strategic insight, the big Sun Tzu know the terrain thing, and turn it into something you can actually do something with, and then teach it. That's where we're trying to get, right? It also builds on ideas that we've been talking about since the beginning, right? Interpreting and writing rules and standards. Risk management. What risks are you willing to trade off? What risks are you trying to solve or mitigate with your tactic or your equipment? Creative and critical thinking. Boyd was big on analysis and synthesis, breaking everything apart and then putting it together into new and useful ways. That is the core of what you're doing as a tactician. OODA loops, systems thinking. We even did an episode about tactics development, like how to take something from a bar napkin to an actual tactic. That was episode 24. So those are all part of the foundation for how we build a tactician. And you have to frame those things into people, ideas, and hardware, or you're going to end up chasing rabbits down rabbit holes and losing credibility, or worse, losing fights. Because you're going to get distracted by stupid stuff.
100% not the point.
Not the point. So to kind of bring this back to, how the Air Force does it and why I'm using them as a model is they've put a lot of time and money and effort into it, right? Building this cadre of school-trained tacticians at the weapons school program. And again, the Navy has its own Top Gun. And I want to caveat real quick, I am not a graduate of any of these programs. I did not go to the weapons instructor course. I am not a Top Gun guy, a WTI guy, any of that. I'm a nerd. And this is my thing. But for various reasons, my career didn't track that way. So what you need to know is this program is a selective program. Like you probably remember the scene from Top Gun, the top 1% or whatever, the best of the best, sir, West Point with honors. We take those guys, the guys who are already high performers, and put them through like a 6-ish month graduate level curriculum. And they get all kinds of academics. They get all kinds of the technical side about the weapons, what the electrons are doing and the radars and stuff like that. And they're also getting how to integrate it. And they're also having to bust out of their core weapon system stovepipe and understand all the other weapon systems and all the other domains of fighting in order to kludge it all together into a useful tactic. So effectively, it's our train the trainer program. Now, again, considering law enforcement, you probably don't have nearly that level of time or investment or manpower to have that cadre that builds the rest of the cadre out. But you got to think about how to do that. And same with the civilian world. How do you develop yourself out as an effective tactician? Well, you go to high quality courses. You're going to go spend the money on them and spend the time on them. And you also need to supplement that. By doing things like tactical tangents, listen to what we have to tell you, finding subject matter experts and seeking them out.
One of the ways that I think about this is there's a book called The Art of Learning. The guy that wrote it, Joshua Whiteskin, talks about what he calls making smaller circles, which that analogy was very confusing for me. He talked about reducing friction points. And the way I like to think of it, my adaptation of that is think of all of your learning like an outline where you've got your bullet points, right? And you've got the core of your job is maybe, I don't know, 3 to 5 main bullet points. And as you move forward through your learning process, you put subpoints under each of those. So of your 3 to 5 major components, you've got, I don't know, 2, 3, 5 subpoints under that. And then as you learn a little bit more, you start filling out more and more detail under each of those subpoints, and you kind of just go down the tree and you expand the outline.
I like that. That's cool.
You're taking this, what started as just a something that fit on the bar napkin or the Post-it note, 3 or 5 little things that you made a list of, whatever those core components were, and you start going down all those rabbit holes. And as you start filling those things out, you can also include in there little examples. Maybe it's Waco, maybe it's Ruby Ridge, maybe for the Air Force guys, it's something like the Desert One incident. The 79 hostage rescue attempt. Whatever it might be, you've got these bullet points that will fit into those core components of your job, and you find nuance in there. And earlier, Jim talked about, you said creativity and something else. It was before analysis and synthesis, Jim.
Critical thinking?
Critical thinking and creative space, I think, was the term that you used. And the critical thinking and creative space makes me think of a concept in education called Bloom's taxonomy.
Ooh,
I think that's...
I don't know. We're getting pretty...
Is it taxonomy? Is that the right word?
Taxidermy?
Anyway.
I don't know. Some shit.
Yeah, yeah. And it was basically this concept where researchers, and I might not be describing this perfectly, but researchers looked at learning objectives using different verbs. And so if it was to recall something or to remember something, that means that if I prompt you about, hey, do you remember Waco? Yeah, is that the thing with the... No, it was this and this and this. Oh, that's right. Okay. That's like a lower level of learning. But at a higher level learning, you might be able to compare and contrast. What was the difference between Waco and Ruby Ridge? And at a higher level than that, you can start looking at things like creativity and innovation. You can say, hey, we had this and this happened at Waco, this and this happened at Ruby Ridge. You can maybe take 3 or 4 other case studies and say, like, what would we do if X, Y, and Z occurred? And it's a completely made up scenario that maybe you can test in a scenario, right? In a live action role play kind of thing.
Or you could choose to be one more moron on the internet posting like, oh my God, Waco. Like you could be the guy making the comments on the internet, and that's fine, but you're putting yourself in a category when you do that.
Yeah.
And what we're trying to do is get past that and understand what the actual lessons at every level are, from the individual decision makers, right? Lon Ryuichi sitting behind his rifle, to the guys writing on-site policy, the guys who were rewriting the rules of engagement, to decisions the Attorney General was making, the decisions the President was making, all that.
Right. So the idea, though, with these trying to get to that higher level learning as you progress through your professional development, is that as you move forward, you're going to be able to evaluate, compare, contrast, and even challenge different ideas. And that is important from an organizational level to try to raise that baseline for people and elevate the conversation. And that's largely what we're trying to do here, not only with this episode, but the project in general, is to help people raise that baseline.
Yeah. There's a way the Air Force tries to raise its lowest common denominator in a flying unit. And sometimes I like it, sometimes I don't. Take it for what it's worth. But it has 3 fundamental functions in a flying unit. There's a training office that's there to create the training events and track the training events and the performance to get guys up to a certain standard. There's a standardization evaluation office that sets the standard and then grades guys against that standard, right? They give you your check ride or your, like, what is it when you get your driver's license, like your, what do they call that?
Road test or whatever?
Yeah, it's the guy who gives you the road test. He sits there with a clipboard, sometimes literally a clipboard, and like, oh, you you didn't parallel park right or whatever. And there's a tactics office. So training, again, is how we get people to the standards. Stan eval, standardization evaluation, sets the standards and measures whether you're meeting them. And then tactics figures out where we as an organization are going wrong, right? Finds the deficiencies in both performance and practices and figures out ways to improve on them. In a police system, which is not my world, maybe that could mean expanding your tactics programs and establish that cadre of officers within your agency or at the state level and make sure that you've got dedicated training for all of the teachers, right? All the firearms instructors, all the driver instructors. And I know you have some level of certification, but what is unifying that effort?
And it's something that, generally speaking, we do have. Yeah. So like our in-service training guys, we had Danimal on the show a long time ago, and he's in charge of, at my agency, annual or advanced officer training or in-service training. And so he's got guys under his authority that are in those different realms, and like their job is to find the synergy and the blend and the mojo. But again, it's like any bureaucracy. There's limitations on money, there's limitations on time, there's limitation on resources. One of the biggest issues is, okay, so like I've got a group of guys, and historically training has always relied on people like their SWAT teams or tactical teams, because we get to train a lot more. But the challenge always becomes like, how do I distill this into something that I can push out to 1,000 cops? Yep. Effectively to a level of, and again, talk about that higher level learning. You might run a scenario and guys get 5 minutes of action, and then a 10 or 15 minute debrief, and by the time you've run everyone through that, that's your day. That's a whole day. Yep. So there are two. It's a difficult thing. There
are two core problems in that. One is, how do I develop those in-service trainers? And two, if I'm in a small agency that doesn't have that capacity, what do I do? If I've got 20 guys in my unit, I can't assign, or not my unit, my agency, I can't assign 5 of them to be dedicated trainers. Like, it just doesn't work, right? And one thought is broaden out the tactical expertise. Go get cross-training. Get some discussion, get back and forth with surrounding agencies. Like the feds, go talk to the marshals, talk to the FBI guys, talk to the Secret Service guys. They might have ideas you like. They might have ideas you don't like. That's cool. But talk to them, right? Figure out what's going on around you. Talk to the military, the soft community or the security communities within the military. Again, they're going to have things you like, things you don't like. That's okay too.
I have an idea.
What you got?
Why don't you get the younger, newer guys involved in the teaching process earlier and sooner?
Oh,
because that is going to start to tease out their own level of expertise and that higher level learning sooner, right?
It's funny you mentioned that. Do you know the average age and rank of the guys we send to the cool weapons courses in the Air Force?
Nope.
We like young captains. Not the majors, not the lieutenant colonels, not the guys with 5,000 hours. We like the guys with like 1,000 hours, who have established themselves as high potential, high performance guys, because that's how we get the most return on our investment. So in terms of thinking about how to be a tactician and what that means to you, I always want you to put in the context of people, ideas, and hardware, always in that order, and it's especially true when we're talking tactics, because it's easy to get distracted and confused as you go. So developing out people. Well, first off, you got to develop yourself. You got to be a high credibility teacher, and you have to be both a doer and a teacher. Like there's this saying about those who can do and those who can't teach. You don't get to be that, right? You don't get to keep any credibility if you suck at doing the thing you're teaching. And think of yourself as a teacher first. Even if you're like a concealed carrier and you're just trying to develop yourself out personally, you're going to learn a lot by teaching. And you're going to screw it up, and that's okay. But you need to see yourself as a teacher.
Yeah, that's where I learned the most early on when, I got out of the academy and I was out on my own. The first opportunity that I had to start going out and being a role player at like academy scenarios, I got to see the other end of it, right? And I could watch people make the mistakes from a position where I didn't have to necessarily worry about my own performance, and with a little bit of detachment. And I got to see a lot of people do it, go through the same scenario over and over. And that helped me think of it as, in the sense of being a teacher and trying to become a teacher. It helped me. I could participate in the debriefs and all those things, and it helped me differentiate the pros and cons of different approaches to handling a situation. And so I think that goes a long way in becoming a teacher. And it's why I like that idea of pushing it out to the youngest guys. But I think we have to define a little bit what it means to be a high credibility teacher. And I think being a doer goes a long way there, because it prevents us from getting kind of stuck in our old ways if you're a guy that's still out and doing it. And I remember, even in the realm of the positions that I work in now, the teams and the unit that I work in now, 5 or 10 years ago, guys did things differently. Even the old school guys, even the old salty dogs who, some might have said were stuck in their ways, have evolved. And that's important. You have to be willing and able to effectively challenge assumptions and whatever your current practices or doctrine are. You have to recognize that whatever you're doing right now, or whatever you're doing now in 5 or 10 years, is going to change. It's likely to be different. We're going to see things evolve. And more importantly, you might be the one that's writing or designing those changes.
Absolutely.
So don't just do stuff because you've always done it. Being high credibility means that you have to be willing to challenge it, right? And that's where people start to see, it was an unpopular thing when, not that unpopular, but for a lot of people, the idea of switching from 40 to 9 was like a thing for people. And it took those of us that were on board with why we would be switching to say like, no, that's a good thing. And the younger guys who just thought like 40's mo better, had to wrap their heads around it. And it was guys with the high credibility that were able to say, no, 9 is better. This is why, right? And we all have to accept that. And you know what? In 10 years, there might be a new fancy round, and that could change things yet again.
32 ACP.
But that's what being high credibility is about, is willing to challenge that.
Absolutely. You need to build a cadre of teachers, and you need to be focused on building up a cadre of teachers, right? Again, the way you bring up the lowest common denominator is you build up your trainer or teacher cadre. So think about, if I want to have better police academy recruits, I need better police academy teachers. So the train the trainer thing has to be an absolute focus, maybe fixation for a lot of this.
I mentioned how it helped me learn a lot and think of myself as a teacher when I went out there and started participating in scenarios and stuff at the academy. And it turns out that teaching is one of the best ways that I learn, because it forces me to be ready to answer difficult questions. And so I have to challenge my own way of thinking on those things so that I can be ready to handle.
Officer Mike, where do babies come from?
Yeah, yeah. Like, you don't want to have just a superficial understanding of things, right? And so I think there's something to be said about, like, nowadays it's really common to have people do teach backs where you teach, and I hate it. It's dumb, but like, there's a reason that's a thing. And maybe there's a better format for that. Maybe there's a way to get people to do more discussion stuff. We had an instructor development episode that we did with Brian Willis that had a lot of great ideas for that. Let me stop there for a second. We're throwing a lot of previous episodes at you guys tonight. There's a reason, because that's what this entire show is about.
We've been building to this, right?
Yes. So I think it's important that you're pushing out the teaching at a lower level. Get those young new guys involved in that process. That is stage 1 of their instructor development. I mean, obviously it starts for them being a good student, but as you start bringing them into being role players, after or in between each repetition that people do, you can talk to them about, hey, did you notice how he did X, Y, and Z? And you can point out stuff that they might not have noticed without you seeing it. And now on the next one, they'll be like, oh yeah, hey, he did that thing again where, they said this, or they put their finger on the trigger, at this time instead of that time, or, any number of things that you notice that they don't. Get them involved in that process. And Jim talked about what it means to become an instructor. And there's a bureaucratic side to that, which is, you can go to an instructor course, right? You could go be an NRA firearms instructor, or a Arizona Post firearms instructor.
And I want to talk about that real quick. Like, if you're a concealed carrier, again, how does this relate back to personal defense? Go make yourself a teacher. Go get an NRA instructor qualification. Go get certified to teach concealed carry. I guarantee you will become a better and smarter concealed carrier if you get that level of training and certification.
Well, and think of it too like this. If you, let's say you want to be you want to go get your concealed carry license or whatever, you're going to go do the classes, but now you're going to have a gun in your house and you want to teach your spouse a little something about what you've learned about carrying the gun. You have to start with that mentality that you're going to teach this, or you want to teach gun safety to the kids that you have living in your house. Start with that, right? But where I'm going with this is, just because you go get that card or that certificate that makes you a quote unquote instructor, that doesn't make you a good one, right? So you have to have that personal responsibility, your own personal investment and ownership in potentially running that program someday. And I think that helps you build a cadre of teachers. If you give them that investment and you empower the young guys to really take part in this and build them up, then you're going to build up everyone else with it, right? If that's part of the culture, that we build everyone to become part of the teacher or instructor cadre, we're moving in the right direction.
And for developing your people and teaching your people, think about building up your instructional resources. The toughest resource is always time. How do you get time for training and time for teaching? If you get 30 minutes, how do you get the most bang for that amount of time? So think about that. Think about forcing the issue to get training on the schedule. And it's not always necessarily like the set in-service training. Like, okay, we're going to knock out fire extinguisher training, or human relations, don't touch people inappropriately training, or whatever. Like, that's great. Dedicated fighting training and decision-making training. One of the things that we often do in the military is a tactics talk. So Friday afternoon, we go link up in the bar, or the heritage room, as we call it in the military, and we sit around and we talk about stupid mistakes we made that week and call each other out and talk about, this is a thing I learned. I tried to shoot this missile. It didn't work in this regime. That's something we should probably write down, right? We start getting that discussion and crossflow going. So get some dedicated time and specifically tactics talks. Another thing you need to get is money. Good training often costs money. And one of the reasons it costs money is it costs money to get good guest instructors. If you're just teaching yourself over and over and over, or teaching your own guys over and over and over, you're going to get kind of stale and stagnant and maybe a little incestuous. Bring in outside help. Pay people to come if you have to. Get guest instructors. And then think about facilities and equipment. And again, kind of the people ideas hardware thing, but hardware focused on training people is a good investment usually. So things like building up your training ranges and your training facilities, getting simulators, getting even things like Manus X to develop guys in their shooting skills, or dry fire mags to develop guys in their shooting skills.
And for the record, there are sponsors, but there are sponsors for a reason.
Yep.
Right? We believe in companies and people that are focused on those things, right?
Yep. And the next category I want you to think about is ideas. You are there to critically evaluate and then deliver best practices to the rest of the organization. That's one of your jobs as a tactician. And it starts with getting those good ideas and soliciting ideas from both inside and outside the organization. One of my favorite sayings from tactics is, bring me your bar napkins. If you got some good idea, write it down. We had a thing on my airplane where crew members in the back of the plane were slipping and falling. And one guy was like, how come we don't have like skateboard tape on the floor? And we're like, I don't know, because we never have before. And so one guy said, let's do that. And then we put skateboard tape on the floor.
Like Home Depot carries that.
Yeah, it's stuff like that. right? Sometimes it's an equipment thing. Sometimes it's a how we do business thing. But write it down. And then once it's written down on at least a bar napkin, talk about it. Talk about it among kind of the smart guys in the organization. And then test it and pressure test it. And consider whether it can be executed by everybody or only by the A team. Does it have to be Chuck Yeager that's doing it? Does it have to be the SWAT guys doing it? Or can Private Snuffy or Officer Skippy do it? And, Mike and I talk a lot about the phrase, let the crazy guy talk. I got that from the Israeli intelligence services. They like that saying. But there's a caveat there. Let the crazy guy talk, and then you need a quorum of sober people, the adults in the room, to challenge the idea and kind of murder board it, right?
And there's an important component to that, because we want to let the crazy guy talk. We want to have the sober adults challenge his idea, but we also want to be open to them and not just shut them down, right? What can you do to help shape that into something valuable? Don't just be a naysayer, right? Be there to help vet it and to develop it.
So I'll give you
if it's worth canning, then can it. But I think it's important to point out though that saying that like, oh well, we have a murder board and all they do is just shut down everyone else's ideas, and if they didn't think about it, it wasn't any good. That's not helpful.
Yeah. So as an example, say I'm Jim 15 years ago, and I watched a video by a Krav Maga teacher who talked about the Israeli way of carrying a gun. And I was like, oh boy, this is so exciting. The Israelis are so cool. And they carry guns with an empty chamber because it's safer that way. And they have this way that as you draw it, you rack the slide and then you're ready to go. And so it's safer, but also better because the Israelis do it. So I have this idea and I bring it on a bar napkin and I hand it to Mike and I say, Mike, this is my good idea. I stole it from the Israelis, so it must be good. And then Mike's job as a tactician is to say, oh, that's a good idea. Let's work on it. Let's test it. And then he takes it to a quorum of sober people, and the other SWAT guys who work with Mike are like, nope. Here's 5 reasons why we don't like this idea, because, it's like assuming that you can put on your seatbelt while you're in the middle of a car crash. Like when you need a gun, you need it right then. And oh, by the way, it requires a lot more muscle movement and you lose a lot of economy of motion getting the gun racked on the draw. But hey, let's test it. And so go ahead and test it. Get a couple simunition guns, and go ahead and test it with somebody fighting you for your own gun and see how it works out. And if it's better, do it. If it's not, don't. Here's a clue. It's not better.
Yeah.
So once you've developed out that tactic, write it down. The difference between science and screwing around is writing it down. Write it down. Teach it and then train to it. And when you write it down, it's got to be written and explained and illustrated so clearly that someone from another agency who will never meet you can figure it out and implement it. And speaking of that, this is a good time to talk about the fact that no one should be irreplaceable, right? Even your tacticians, if your whole agency is reliant on one guy, one personality, or one super proficient, golden hands, golden child, you're doing it wrong. One of your jobs as a tactician is develop out several other tacticians and train your replacement.
And kind of a related point to all of this, but separate, is that whenever this lowest common denominator thing comes up, and the reason I say this is we're talking about writing it down and having it so clear that someone else that isn't familiar can pick it up and do something with it, right? Like teaching to the lowest common denominator in a lot of ways is just a fact of life. You can't expect the new guy that comes out of the academy to have the knowledge, experience, and insight that the SMEs and the guys writing this stuff has, right? Like we don't want to give in to that idea of teaching to the lowest common denominator, but as teachers, as tacticians, and as leaders of these industries or organizations, it's our responsibility to distill it down into a best practice or a norm or a custom or whatever in a way that is simple and consistent and reliable and repeatable, right? In other words, when we decided what the best practices were for approaching a car on a traffic stop, right? And there's a number of options when you approach a car on a traffic stop. There's a lot that goes into that. And again, that's an evolving thing. People have made adjustments to that, and more research has been done even recently. But at the end of the day, what I need to do is say, like, okay, these are my bullet points. Like, to prevent this list of issues, the best way that we can approach traffic stops are by these best practices. And that needs to be simple enough that even if a rookie can't understand or explain all the nuance there, or all the data and the research and whatever, that they can at least carry out those elements of it, right? So the lowest common denominator thing, we don't want to stop there, right? We understand that we have to start somewhere, but I think that's why it's important that when you write this stuff down and when we're distilling it into a best practice, that's part of it, right? Like we have to, there is some necessity in understanding why the lowest common denominator thing is a factor.
It's also tough when you do write stuff down. Just basic communication, you have to assume some information is going to get lost in the transmission, right? So it's not necessarily going to be the dumbest guy who reads it, but you don't want to leave it subject to misinterpretation or reinterpretation. That's how you get one of my biggest pet peeves, the tactical telephone game, right? Some guy somewhere, and we've talked about this a lot on the podcast, came up with the 21-foot principle.
Right.
There's one specific guy in Utah came up with this principle. He wrote it down. Did a pretty good job writing it down. And then the internet got a hold of it, and then it developed and grew and mutated and morphed into all kinds of things that it's not. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. Made sense at the time in a context, and then it rotated and morphed, and now it's almost unrecognizable when you see it taught sometimes. So
well, if I take a police recruit, an academy recruit, like let's say I was trying to teach him something like that, and the alternative was, okay, well, I have graphs and charts and statistics and standard deviations and analyses of reaction times and splits and all these things that I could sit there and we can analyze and do all the formulas on.
And I have instructors who will absolutely do that, and it makes me want to gouge my eyes out.
You will lose them.
Yeah.
Because these guys are already drinking through a fire hose, learning everything they can about constitutional law, criminal law, firearms, defensive tactics, driving, all these other things. And now you're over here throwing a bunch of math problems at them. Yeah, you have to kind of be able to distill that. And your lesson plans, of course, you want to write stuff down and have that somewhere as a reference. But there's a balance that you have to strike there.
So this actually brings up a good point. Mike talked about that outline. And that outline's a good analogy for this, right? You need to have your first level information. The first level information is think about distance and time and reaction time. Next level, think about the fact that we've actually quantified this. Next level, one specific toiler dude or tooler dude quantified it, and here's his study if you want to ever deep dive it. If you're bored on a shift, Google that. And then here's the next level. Not only have we tested it, we've retested it over and over and over, and here are some of the problems and gaps in it. Oh, and here's the next level, and here's the next level, right? So help those inspired learners have somewhere to go.
Fill out the bullet points.
Yep.
And go down the rabbit holes and build them up. You have to start somewhere, but one of the keys in doing this is making sure that you're building that flexibility into your lesson plans and your tactics and your ideas, and to challenge and review them from time to time so that we don't fall into those traps, right? But building flexibility into your tactics, I think, goes a long way so that you can adjust for it. And part of that is going to help them learn those nuances, because when you tell them 21 feet is 21 feet, for example, right? That's too rigid. That's too concrete. You have to build on that. You can't stop there.
Yep. So next thing I want you to think about is the hardware, right? People, ideas, hardware. You are there to incorporate and drive technology. Don't let the technology drive you. You drive it. You're the advocate for the operators. You're the operational tester for the operators. So you should see the widgets first. And it's not just about getting your fingers on the gear and stuff like that. But you have a responsibility in the organization as the train-the-trainer type guy to do some of that operational testing, to know what's coming down the pipe. Figure out how it's going to work, both in physically how it's going to work and also procedurally how it's going to work. How do we incorporate it into how we do business? And that's everything. How do we handle getting a new light in the organization, a new flashlight, or a new gun, or a new body camera, or a new car? Say we switch from Crown Victorias to Ford Explorers. Some responsible adult needs to think about all the things we're going to have to deal with that, right? There's a logistics chain, different tires. There's a difference in how they drive. Does that change how I do my traffic stops? I don't know. And maybe there's details of that I don't want to get into, but that's the kind of thing I need a tactician to think about, right? And it's how to fit the widget into your existing construct, or what you have to change about your existing practices in order to incorporate it. You also have to be a voice of reason within the, within the organization for integrating that thing. There might be this cool new light or a red dot sight, but does it work with your guns? Does it work with your holsters? Can you modify the holster you've got, or do you need to replace the holster altogether? You're the guy who's supposed to know that. And you also have to be the first line of reasoning about whether you even need the new widget. Or maybe you focus on getting better with the stuff you've already got.
The hardware component is such an important thing to talk about here in this episode, because we put so much emphasis on people, ideas, hardware in that order that it probably sounds to, and we've addressed this before, but to a lot of people, it probably sounds like we're shitting on hardware, that we're not in favor of gear or technology. And my friends will tell you that is not the case.
Like, if I'm a geardo if there ever was one. Yep.
Yeah. If there's new kit, I want to know about it and I want to check it out. Like, I'm all about that. But the reason that I'm about it is because I'm constantly thinking about the ways that I can use it and the ideas and the tactics that they can drive. So you have to frame it correctly. A good example of this is body-worn cameras. I think that, and I don't, this is, everyone has their own probably opinion on this. This is just my feeling. But I think that body-worn cameras, for a lot of people, they thought that it was going to be an accountability tool and it was going to, stop a bunch of corruption and all this stuff. And that's not true. I really like body-worn cameras. They've done nothing but help me. But I do think that some people had expectations for what body cameras were going to accomplish that were far-fetched. And what I mean by that is body cameras are not going to fix the problems that we have. A lot of the problems, in my eyes, that we have in law enforcement, at least that we can control, right, have to do with training. Either not enough of it, or not good enough, or not modern enough, or whatever. We need to do more and better training for cops. And the body-worn cameras doesn't provide that. However, it does illuminate that. It illuminates the need. It's a window into those deficiencies. Now we see the errors that cops are making. We can go back and replay them, right? We can examine them and we can collect data on them. And now I can use that to better train guys and to use them as examples. So
it's like the black box on an airplane, right? We have fewer human-caused plane crashes because we can go back and figure out what mistakes the humans on the airplane made.
Right. So the body-worn cameras, I think that a lot of people thought they were going to be a fix to a problem. They are not a fix. They're simply a window. They illuminate the problem for us, right? And then we have to go and find solutions and use them to our advantage, which I think we're doing. And that's why I like them so much. But, just understand that the difference, right? It's not that we're shitting on gear. It's just that we want to be thoughtful about it.
You also need to see yourself as an organizational problem solver. And that's easier sometimes in the military than in law enforcement, and easier in law enforcement than concealed carry, but bear with me on this. You need to be the subject matter expert, and you need to be the conduit between strategy, operational level guidance, the rules, and the actual tactics. So think about, how do you adjust the field practices to achieve the general's goal or the police chief's goal? How do you adjust your own practices as a concealed carrier to navigate that Walmart parking lot with the gun you've got, with the state laws you fall under, with the environment you're in? You're the guy who's got to solve the problem of getting across that parking lot at midnight when you had to go buy diapers and the drunk guy walks up to you and starts hustling you for money, or the tweaker, or whoever. You need to be able to provide your boss, who is maybe you, viable options in both a crisis and in longer term planning. Now, this is going to get a little academic. Bear with me. Take a look. Just Google it sometime, right? We're talking about that build up your outline. Google this one sometime. MDMP, the military decision-making process. It's a little dry. That's okay. You're a smart guy or gal. The purpose of the military decision-making process is to help staff weenies, like me, in the military, provide good choices to their commanders. Now think about this. A good boss wants and often demands a menu. They want choices. They want clearly quantified and considered costs and risks and payoffs. So what this usually looks like is COAs, courses of action. Okay? Option 1, we do it this way. Option 2, we do it that way. Option 3, we do nothing. And I think it's always important to incorporate a do nothing option because decision makers need to see it. And it'll help them overcome that paralysis by analysis or the we'll just wait and see approach.
Yeah, because you're basically doing that. If you're not, you're doing nothing by
doing nothing. So think of yourself.
Which I see all the time.
Yeah. So think of yourself in law enforcement. How do I help my agency solve its biggest problems? And I don't know what your biggest problems are, and it's going to vary. Phoenix has different problems from Colorado Springs, has different problems from Austin. But if you are the tactical subject matter expert that you are trying to be, this is where you make money for the organization. And a good tactician has to be able to integrate capabilities. Capabilities aren't just the equipment. It's also the functions, right? So you probably have a specialty you grew up in. In the military, that might be like your occupational specialty, or your Air Force specialty code or whatever, right? You're a pilot, or you're a maintainer, or you're a 11 Bravo or an 18 Delta, or whatever it is you are. Or your major weapon system. You're an Apache guy, or you're a gunship guy, or you're a F-15 Strike Eagle guy, or whatever. In law enforcement, it might be your like patrol division, or the canine, or SWAT team. In personal defense, that might be one particular area you have deep dived. Maybe that's concealed carry. Maybe that's disaster survival. Maybe you're a big prepper. Well, as a tactician, you have to see outside of your stovepipe. And you have to see how those specialties all come together and figure out where we can get efficiency or synergy. Where are the gaps in your capabilities and your training? So it starts by learning the capabilities of the other stovepipes. Another way to think of this is cross-domain or combined arms. So if you're a patrol cop, at some point in your career, you should make a point of deep diving the air unit, or the canine unit, or the SWAT team. Figure out what they can and can't do. Like this, the baseline, what can I expect from these guys? And their limitations. What shouldn't I expect from these guys? If you're a personal defense guy, get training on something you've never done. Maybe you're big on competition shooting. Cool. Take a driving class. Take an emergency medicine class. Get out of your comfort zone.
This is something that working on specialized teams has really helped me understand because, for example, one of the first things that I can tell you as a canine guy, as a dog handler, is which calls are not dog calls. And so a lot of people, they will call for canine because that's just part of the checklist that they might be going down. But I might get there and say, hey, this is not really something that the dog is going to be an appropriate tool. At the same time, for example, as a SWAT guy, I have a basic understanding of all these different specialties that certain guys on the team have, right? So on a SWAT team, we've got snipers and breachers and medics and all these different specialties. So for example, I'm not a breacher, but I have an understanding of breaching. I know how to use many of the tools. I know how to do the basics. And in my case, I happen to be a medic, but not everyone on my team is. And even the ones who are not, they get more training on immediate action drills and trauma care than the average officer does. So it's easy to have concerns about becoming like the jack of all trades, master of none. And I'm not sure how I feel about that analogy. And, to be clear, I have my rabbit holes, like the things that I specialize in, and everyone should. You have your parts of your outline that are more filled out than others.
Exactly.
Right? But that's the thing about working in the tactical setting is that, for example, if my SWAT team does a hostage rescue, once that front door comes open, I can't tell you with absolute certainty which shooter is going to get the opportunity to confront the bad guy. So that means that everyone on that entry team, from the newest and youngest guy to the most experienced and tenured guy, has to be ready and capable to take that shot. So as a tactician, even if you have your specialty or your focus, CCW, shooting, whatever, you're a detective or you work in one or whatever unit, right? There are certain things that you need to be able to be a little bit of a Swiss Army knife about.
That's a good point.
So tease out your outline.
So to relate this back to how the Air Force does this with its weapons instructor course, during that course, the students are forced to integrate with one another in order to accomplish the goals of the exercise that they get put in. And one of the big things is to set up so you will straight up fail the course if you get stuck in your own little weapon system bubble. So it's designed to force you to get out of that. And one of the benefits of that is once they graduate from their weapons course, they have this like network of dudes that they can call to help them solve problems, right? Guys they went through the training with who were in different weapon systems. So if I'm a C-17 guy and I need to do a big airdrop and I need to suppress all the enemy air defenses, I can call up the F-16 weapons school guys and say, hey, what can you do for me? What can't you do for me? And they've got that like personal connection that they can immediately call upon the network, right? And now the caution I would give you, especially as a guy who didn't do weapons school, is you get into this, you have the potential to get into this caste system, right? Where there's the A team and they all know each other and they're all bros. And then there's the B team, the lowest common denominator guys who are just sitting there waiting to be told what to do. And I would offer, whether you are the SWAT guy or not, whether you're the patch, the guy with the weapons school graduate patch or not, never be satisfied getting lumped into the lowest common denominator. Make yourself the subject matter expert. Go start those conversations. And it might be a little tougher for you if you don't have that, cool guy aura about you from being on a special team or having a special certification. That's fine. That's where you have to man up and go start the conversation. Go make yourself the subject matter expert. Be the inspired learner. Another concept in being a tactician and what your role is you have to incorporate and then drive intel, as in threat intelligence. Now, this is going to mean different things in different contexts, right? There's the way I handle my intel guys in a flying unit and the way a concealed carrier has to think about it, right? Those are different realms, but think about it. You need to be an assertive and critical consumer of information about the threat. Let me say that again, because it's a big deal. You need to be an assertive and critical consumer of information about the threat. Whatever the threat is. And in the military, that doesn't mean being a dick to the intel folks, which I've definitely done. You need to pay attention when they talk. You need to ask good questions. And then you need to tell them if you need some information that you aren't getting. So you have to be an active consumer of the information. Now, in law enforcement, and Mike can talk in more detail, but I know that cops get like police bulletins or intel bulletins like, hey, by the way, more and more guys are putting guns inside their belt buckles. Like, I see that police bulletin all the time. I don't know why, but I see it all the time. Maybe you can give some feedback to the guys who produce that and be like, well, actually, how often are we really seeing this? Or what else are we missing? Or what tactic are the bad guys doing that we're not tracking? Mike, is there anything you want to speak to on that?
Not really. I mean, other than, well, the first thing I want to say is there's a difference between intelligence and information, right?
Yeah.
So you get information, and that is just data points, and that's fine. intelligence has some analysis to it, right? It has some, I hate to use the word narrative.
Something I can act on.
It's got some beef to it, right? It's got some comprehension that comes beyond just like, okay, this is the information, but this is what it means. There's an implication there.
Yeah.
And so, rather than just like having bulletins that just have stats and numbers and data, what does this mean for me? Like, what can I do with this, right? And the second thing, separate idea about incorporating and driving intel is one thing we see a lot in law enforcement, and I would like to think that it's not widespread. It's just every once in a while you get a personality involved that has this mindset where someone is tracking a guy and they want to be the guy, or they want their unit to be the unit to catch the person. And so they will like hoard the information so that no one else can have it, so that they can be the one to get the big bust and get all the credit, right? And I think making sure that your priorities are straight and that everyone understands the mission. So like Jim is saying, driving the intel, right? Understanding the mission, which is to take a violent offender off the streets, for example, that should have widespread information sharing. And there's a legitimate concern sometimes that with information, let's say that there is some drug dealer working out of a house somewhere on the east side of town, and there's this information that the undercover narcotics guys are working, but they don't want patrol or anyone to get a hold of that because they don't want to burn down the operation, right? Well, that is a communication issue, right? That means that you're not being clear enough that, hey, this is an undercover operation that's going on. We don't want anyone to go in and start peeing all over it. We're working on something, right? And so I think just making sure that you're putting the mission first and that you're clear about your objectives speaks to consuming information and intelligence in a way, and distributing, perhaps more importantly, distributing information and intelligence in a way that is meaningful for everybody.
As well said. Now, in personal defense, this is trickier, right? Because you don't have an intel function, or maybe you do, and that's weird. But it starts with paying attention to local news. Go find the local newspaper, or, if it's online or whatever, and read through what's happening crime-wise around you. And also go engage with the cops. And there are different ways you can do that. You can do, there's civilian police academy opportunities in a lot of cities. You can host a neighborhood watch party and ask the local police to come out and speak at it. Or if you just see a cop, at a Starbucks, buy his coffee and strike up a conversation with him. Ask them, and most of them are happy to talk about what they're seeing and what they're not seeing. Ask them about the trends they're seeing. How are cars getting stolen? Where are they being stolen from? How are houses getting broken into? How are the criminals picking houses to break into? How common are home invasion robberies for the non-drug affiliated houses? That's good intel. That's good local intel. And the cops are probably going to be the best ones for that. You also need to be an offensive subject matter expert and a defensive subject matter expert. And usually I don't like to break it down like that, but for this conversation, it'll help, right? In a military context, on my aircraft, there are the offensive capabilities, the missiles and bombs and guns and stuff. And there are the defensive capabilities, the flares, the jammers, the radar warning receivers. And those are two different bodies of knowledge. And you kind of have to know both. And you got to think about, how do I protect this airplane when I'm getting shot at? And how do I use this airplane to deliver effects to the enemy? And similarly, you have to think about your own equipment and how it works together, both offensive and defensive. So for a cop, think about the capabilities and limitations of your own equipment. What is the effective range of your gun? What's the actual reliability of your gun? Have you ever tested it? Have you ever run it to failure? Do you know what your average number of rounds between failures is? An average number of rounds between critical failures, the ones where you have to take apart the gun to fix it. You should have some sense. If you're carrying a 1911, that's going to be one number. If you're carrying a Glock 19, that's going to be a different number. If you keep the gun well maintained, that's going to be a number versus not well maintained. Same with your defensive capabilities. If you're a cop and you wear body armor, you should probably know something about that body armor. What can it stop? What won't it stop? And you should kind of know the condition of it. Is it the same armor you've been wearing since the police academy? What's it been through? Have you had to wash it? Has that changed anything about it, right? So you have to deep dive your equipment, and you have to deep dive your capabilities. What can and can't you do? And look for the gaps and look for the weaknesses and try to fix them. So, some aircraft, they have defensive systems that are designed for 1984, and they're really good at defending themselves against Russian, Soviet, Cold War, 1984 threats. But they're not going to do too well in 2020 or 2021 threats. Similarly, if you're in a law enforcement agency, how current are your tactics? Are you on the state of the art for responding to a school shooting? Are you on the state of the art for handling the next DC sniper? Does your agency have the institutional knowledge for how they caught the DC snipers? If not, why not? And if you're not preparing for stuff like that, what's your reasoning behind it? Do you have a logical flow behind why you're investing time, money, and effort in one problem, but not the other problems? Is it the most likely stuff? Is it the most dangerous stuff? And that goes back to risk management.
Jim splits it up into offensive and defensive. One way I like to think about this sort of thing is internal and external. So,
solid.
What are the things that I have control over and what are the things that I don't? So if I'm training a new tactic with my team, I have control over the training that I do. I have control over selling it to my chain of command to make sure that they're on board with it. I have control over building flexibility into the tactic so that if things change, we can adjust. And a whole number of things that are within the realm of things that we can affect. There's also things that are external that I have less control over but I have to be prepared to deal with, such as, let's say I'm looking for a fugitive and we're doing some kind of surveillance operation. I have very little control over how much traffic there is. In many cases, if that person is mobile, I don't necessarily have any knowledge of where they're going to go and how much attention they're paying to the people that might be around them. And so there's a number of things outside of what I have control over that I still have to be prepared to deal with, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that was well put.
So I think... What?
That was well put. I like that.
So I think given some time to sit there and look at all of the things that can go wrong when you're looking at tactics and looking at scenarios and to say like, well, what things can we affect and what things can we not affect? And the things that we can't affect, how are we prepared to react to them? And that might mean that we have to be patient and just wait for another day, right? Maybe, hey, today's not our day. This location is not a good location. We need to find another way to tackle this another time. So I think that's another way of looking at it, different than offensive and defensive.
And that was well put. So I want you to understand, as a tactician, it's more than just being able to shoot the gun real good. It's more than being able to wrestle someone to the ground real good. You've got to do those, but those are like the baseline. Those are the lowest common denominator of being a tactician. What makes a great tactician are things like being able to process all of the ideas and strategy and philosophy and rules and risk management considerations into how we're actually going to do business day to day. Being a good tactician is about being a good teacher and thinking of yourself as a teacher and developing yourself and your people as good teachers. It's about keeping people, ideas, and hardware in context and contributing to making better people, better ideas, and better hardware. It's about being an organizational problem solver and giving your boss or your organization good choices and well thought out choices. Being a good tactician is about being able to integrate capabilities and thinking outside of your little stovepipe. It's also about incorporating and driving information about the threat, getting that good intel. and being a subject matter expert on your offensive and defensive capabilities and your internal and external situation. That's what makes you a good tactician. That's what gets you past just being the guy who can put a hole on paper when the beep sounds. And that's great. Again, that's a good baseline. Now it's time to grow up and develop as this self-actualized teacher of weapons and tactics, which is where we're trying to go.
I would like to think that anyone who is listening to this show is already doing the right things, because this show is, we try to make it applicable to a number of people, but we obviously have a certain flavor to it, and it is hopefully catering to, not exclusively, but also to people in tactical realms, whether it could be any flavor of public safety, any flavor of military, and even in the self-defense, personal defense realm. But in terms of professional development, that's what we're all about, right? And so it starts
and
with
knowing
being
how
a
to
good
take
student
pieces from each of those, right? Like that's kind of a key point here. Is a tactician in law enforcement knows what things to steal from the military and what things not to steal from the military. A good tactician in law enforcement knows what to steal from concealed carriers and competitors and what not to steal from concealed carriers and competitors. Same with military guys. There are good lessons to learn from cops and lessons we should not be trying to take from cops. And if I'm a concealed carrier, there are cool things the military does and things that I should not try to do if I'm not in the military, right?
Yep. So I think being a good tactician means being a problem solver. And I want you to embody the idea of being a problem solver into your ability to raise the institutional lowest common denominator, to come up with new solutions to problems and to distill those challenges that we face into lessons learned and best practices in your industry, whatever that is. So think about your role as a teacher, right? And start that early. And you don't have to be the grand level subject matter expert instructor. You could just get involved in the teaching process. Go be a role player. Pay close attention. Go seek out opportunities to listen in on debriefs and those sorts of things. Find those opportunities to learn and grow. And if you are in that teaching role, especially if you are climbing the ladder and becoming one of the SME types, think about bringing up the young and enthusiastic, eager people around you and incorporating them into the process, because that is the wave of the future. And the lowest common denominator starts by fostering them and encouraging them to foster the generation behind them. That is such an important thing about being a tactician and raising that cultural knowledge, right? Is by pushing it down to the front lines, to the very lowest level, right? And then bringing that baseline up. This episode is brought to you by Mantis. Mantis is a firearms training tool that tracks the movement of your gun before you pull the trigger. It works in dry fire, which is where I use it the most, but the advanced features in the X10 can even show you what the gun does during recoil, so you can work on your grip and follow through. I train with the Mantis before every shooting qualification, and you should too. So go check them out at mantisx.com.
This episode is also brought to you by Drip Drop. Drip Drop Oral Rehydration Solution is formulated by a doctor for quick absorption of water into the parts of your body that need it. You can find it on dripdrop.com or even on Amazon. And if you're military or law enforcement and your organization is training or operating where it's hot, have your supply guy buy it for you. It's available on GSA Advantage and through its national stock number, NSN system.
Don't forget that we put out new episodes on the 1st and the 15th. If you want to support the show, you can go to Patreon and give us $1 for each new episode. That money is going to go back into bringing you good content. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. We are at TacTangents. If you have questions or feedback for us, you can email us, info@tacticaltangents.com. You can also go to the website and click on the little microphone there and leave us a voice message. If it's good, we'll consider featuring it on the show. And that's all I got. Jim, anything else?
Nope, that's all I got. Have a good one. We appreciate you guys listening. We've had a lot of fun with the podcast so far. Stick with us. Make sure you subscribe. And if you like what we're doing, tell your friends about it. We would love to send you a sticker. And I'd love to see a picture of the coolest place you can put the sticker that's relatively legal and appropriate. Or maybe
you can find the stickers on our website at tacticaltangents.com. All right, good talk.
See ya.